Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to talk about the novel Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll and its 2022 movie adaptation. In this video, I'm going to talk about the differences and the similarities between the two of them. I'm going to tell you whether or not I thought one of them was better than the other. And finally, I'm going to tell you whether or not I recommend one, both, or neither of them. So let's talk a little bit about this book and its plot before we move into how it translated to the screen. Luckiest Girl Alive is a psychological thriller that was published in 2015, and it was very, very popular. It spent 4 months on the New York Times bestseller list. In this novel, we follow a woman in her mid-20s by the name of Ani Fanelli. She is a writer at a women's magazine. She lives in New York City. She's thin. She's beautiful. She is engaged to a wealthy golden boy. She seems to have it all. We quickly come to learn in this novel, because the main character Ani essentially tells us this perfect life that she has meticulously crafted for herself, she uses it as a defense mechanism to shield herself from the darkness that lies in her own past. Namely, horrible things that happened to her during her teenage years when she was in high school. One of those events gained national attention, and there are still a lot of people out there who blame her for it. Back then, she went by her given name, Tiffany, but now as a grown woman, she goes by her nickname, Ani, which I think helps her to feel protected inside of her shell of success. And at the point we meet her, she is really at the peak of her power. She has spent all this time and effort crafting this perfect life for herself. And now she's thinking back on her past, and she's aiming for vindication. It's an interesting book. There is a lot going on. It can be very dark, very challenging to read at times because of the subject matter, and it can get a little bit grating at times because Ani is not a very likable character. She's not intended to be. It's not that I was looking for her to be more likable than she was, but because she is so justifiably angry, it can wear on you at times as a reader. I just very recently did a reread of this book in order to prepare myself to watch this movie and make this video. And it's funny because I noticed that a lot of the things that struck me about the book and about Ani during my first read through struck me almost in the same way during my reread. Here's what I had to say about it in 2016 when I read it for the first time. This book is gritty with a capital G. Tiffany, or Ani as she goes by in adulthood, is a ballbuster in personality, but you can tell by her behavior and her insecurities that she is a very fragile person. And during my reread, Ani was once again the aspect of this story that captured my attention and then held it throughout the entire reading experience. She is smart, she is accomplished, but then on the other hand, she is ruthless and can be thoroughly unlikable in a very entertaining way. However, as you start to get to know her, as she starts to tell us as readers her story of what happened to her in high school, you can see the pain that lies behind this anger she has bubbling just under the surface. But as she starts to really face that anger, she starts to face that pain, look it in the face as opposed to just using that anger to help fuel her ambition for success, she gets closer to figuring out what it is she actually wants out of life. Especially after I finished rereading this book, I felt positive that the movie adaptation, in order to be good, would need a really strong performance from the actress playing Ani. And that's because Ani is a really strong, fully realized character from the moment we meet her. Literally her very first scene, you get a sense of what she's about. And she is that way from that moment on throughout the entire book. But the problem is that Ani wears a mask when she's with other people. There's a difference between what she says and what she actually feels. She knows what people want to hear, and she's more than happy to say that in order to get what she wants. And the only reason why we as readers know that there's a discrepancy there is because we get to hear her thoughts. We get to hear her internal dialogue, and we're able to see that there's a difference between how she feels and how she acts. I wasn't quite sure how they were going to communicate that to viewers of this movie. Mila Kunis is who was chosen to play Ani in the movie adaptation, which, as I mentioned at the start of this video, came out in 2022. However, the book was optioned way back in 2015, closer to its publication date, and Reese Witherspoon was originally supposed to produce this movie. That part ended up falling through, but one thing I'm really glad did end up happening is the fact that the author of the novel, Jessica Knoll, is the one who wrote the screenplay. I was initially very skeptical about Mila Kunis as Ani when I saw the trailer for this movie because she seemed so flat, like emotionless, January Jones and Mad Men style. I'm playing an ice queen, so that means I'll just make myself devoid of personality. I'm very pleased to report that my initial impression did not end up being correct. I think the trailer was just edited in a very poor way. I don't think it really represented what the movie actually has to offer. So I think Mila Kunis did a decent job of playing Ani, but she was definitely helped out by the fact that there are a lot of voiceovers to show us that internal dialogue that Ani is having and to really demonstrate to us as viewers that there are two sides to this character. But I do think that the film's version of Ani is a much more muted version of Ani than the one that we see in the book, and I think that weakens the film overall. As I said in that clip from 2016, Ani is ferocious. She's intimidating. She's unapologetic. And while she's being all those things, she's completely compelling. I wanted that same power on the screen, and it just wasn't there. Now, I can't blame that entirely on Mila Kunis's performance. I think the writing had a little something to do with it. I think Jessica Knoll, who hadn't written a screenplay before this, she's a little bit inexperienced in that regard. I do think she struggled to translate Ani's edginess to the screen. But then, on the other hand, because so much of Ani's strong personality is only shown to us as readers through what's going on inside of her head, I struggle to even think about how it would have been possible. There's also just a lot of material to accommodate in a movie. I mean, this film is already 2 hours long, and I felt like it honestly could have used another hour in order to fully develop some of the plot lines. And this is coming from someone who does not like long movies. I like movies that are 90 minutes long. That's it. But I felt like parts of this movie were left so unfinished because there just wasn't time to do enough with them. However, I do think that Jessica Knoll did a fabulous job with the first act of this movie. The way she unrolled some of the foundational details, it made it really easy to understand what was going on, and it definitely made it easy to just sink into the story. One really smart change that Jessica Knoll made between the book and the movie is Ani's participation in this documentary that's going to be going on about what she went through in high school. In the book, when we meet Ani, she has already decided to participate in the documentary. It's just an evolving thing as we go along. Meanwhile, in the movie, Jessica Knoll turns Ani's participation into this will she, won't she do the documentary kind of plot line. And I really liked that. I think it kept things really intriguing. I actually preferred that element in the movie. But as you can imagine, since I mentioned that there was so much material in the book to work with, a lot of other things were definitely changed or cut entirely. I'm assuming for the sake of time or to keep things moving along. If you've read the book and then gone on to see the film, you'll definitely notice some of those little things. It's not even necessarily worth itemizing those. I understand why they were left out. There just wasn't time. But there is one thing that they left out that I wanted to point out because I think it has the potential to have an impact on the way that viewers see Ani. In the book, Ani develops feelings for a former teacher of hers that she gets back in touch with. There is a whole flirtation there, and he's married. So it kind of plays into Ani being an unlikable character. She does a lot of things that are morally gray or even worse. So I think in the movie, it makes Ani a lot more likable that that aspect isn't included. But then, whereas that might be good for movie audiences, I think it fails to be realistic about who Ani actually is. Meanwhile, the book is not afraid to be brutally honest about that. Yet the biggest change between the book and its movie adaptation is the final act, in which Jessica Knoll basically takes the story in an entirely different direction from what happened in the book. I'm not saying I disliked that part. I'm not saying it was a bad choice, but I can't shake the feeling that it was Jessica Knoll seizing the opportunity to give the book a rewrite. Back when Luckiest Girl Alive was first published, Jessica Knoll was getting a lot of questions from people who were wondering whether any of Ani's traumas, the things that she went through in high school, were based on the author's own experiences. And at the time, Jessica Knoll didn't feel comfortable answering those questions. Later on, she published an essay in Lenny Letter, which was a website and a newsletter for women that closed back in 2018, and she revealed in that piece that yes, one of the traumas that Ani experienced was based on her own experience. So in the final act of the movie adaptation of Luckiest Girl Alive, Jessica Knoll mirrors her own experience and all the things that happened to her after the publication of her novel. She has Ani write a piece about what she went through back in high school, and she has her put it out there in a very public fashion to experience the freedom of telling her own story and to hopefully get even a modicum of closure. Jessica Knoll even incorporates a little piece from her own essay in Lenny Letter into the movie. She has Ani say it to someone who she really needed to say it to. It's a great moment. I can see why she included it. And this reworking of the ending definitely served to give the movie adaptation a more powerful message than the book had. But even though I felt that way, I finished this movie not quite knowing what to think of it. On one hand, I felt really glad that Jessica Knoll got to be honest about her own experience, if that's what she wanted to do. And I'm really glad that she got to translate her own novel to the screen in the way that she wanted to. I can't even imagine how satisfying that must have been. But by the time I got finished really processing my emotions about everything relating to this movie, I kind of landed on the feeling that this movie kind of missed its moment. This book was optioned for a movie adaptation way back in 2015. Feels like a lifetime ago, but it was the peak of the popularity of books and movies with the word girl in the title. Think of even other psychological thrillers like Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train. It was very big during that period of time, and I'm sure this book was picked up with the hopes that it could ride that wave of success. But thankfully for me and all the other readers out there who were getting very tired of seeing the word girl in each and every book title, that moment came and that moment went. It went quite a long time ago. And then with the changes that Jessica Knoll made to the story in the movie adaptation and this very powerful Me Too element that she included, it made me wish more than anything that this movie had come out even just 2 to 3 years ago, back when that was one of the most prominent conversations going on at the time. Discussions surrounding really important issues move so quickly in the age of the internet. And while that's a discussion that is no less important for being a few years old, I would say it's now less of an active discussion going on like it was, and more of just an established part of the public's consciousness. It's not a bad movie, just like it's not a bad book. But I can say with complete honesty that I don't think either one of them are truly exceptional. The best part of the book is Ani. How much of a force she is from the very first page, and the fact that she doesn't lose even an ounce of her strength or her sense of self by the time the book is over. There's some of that in the movie adaptation, but she's far more compelling on the page. I don't know that I necessarily recommend either of these, but if you are curious, it's not as though I think you'll be wasting your time. Definitely, if you've already read the book and you want to see it on the screen, I would recommend watching it. I don't regret the time I spent watching the movie or rereading the book. I had a decent time with both. It's just that I must agree with other reviewers and say that this one fell a little bit flat. But those were my thoughts on Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll and its movie adaptation. If you have any comments or questions about the book, about the movie, about the comparison, about anything I said in this video, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. If you'd like to see more of these book versus movie videos that I do here on my channel, I will link the playlist of all of them in the description box below and up in the cards. And at the bottom of that exact same description box, you'll see links to everywhere you can find me around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram, the two places where I'm the most active, in case you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.